Welcome to Bracket U, a fan experience, part of our college basketball bracket podcast, brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. We're in our 11th year of bracketology work. This is our 5th fan experience where we get to talk to fans across the country. We really want to expand this and get many more of you out into this space so we can learn about the traditions and the players and the fans all around the great game of college basketball. I'm your host, Coach Brian Tonsoni, founder of Delphi Bracketology. And before we get started, I'd like to give a special thanks to our Delphi High School administration for their support of our group, to Bob Thompson for the intro music, for Bryson Hutzel, a junior who created the video intro for us, and Jared Morris of the Back Home Network, who taught me everything there is to know about it, whether I do a good job or bad job here on the podcast. But tonight we're talking Marquette basketball with Alan Bykowski. Alan, tell everyone who you are and how you became a fan and where they can find some of your work.
Thanks, Coach. Pleasure to be here. I have been looking forward to this for a while. We've been going back and forth for a little bit. So my own personal story, I really got into Marquette basketball as a student there. I did grow up in the Milwaukee area, so as a basketball fan, the program was always somewhat proximate to where I was, but it was when I went to school and got into the program, and I picked a really good time to enroll as well. So I enrolled initially in 2001 at Marquette, and in the 2001-2002 season, we had a great year under Tom Crean. That was the first year that Dwayne Wade was eligible to play and really got things going in a good direction. And the next year we went to the Final Four. As a 20-something student, I thought, this is awesome. We are going to be going to Final Fours all the time. NCAA success. We're probably going to win another title. Suffice to say, it hasn't been quite that rosy, but it has been a heck of a ride. We had some great teams under Coach Crean. Buzz Williams had some really nice success here, and Shaka Smart is bringing that back around right now. Personally, I also have been writing for crackedsidewalks.com. That's a website where I post a number of Marquette articles, but this time of the year, I'm primarily focused on bracketology. So suffice to say, I'm paying attention to what you guys are putting out as well, just to see what everybody's thought process looks like. I also do a lot of team previews, and anytime I put something out, I try to add a little bit of extra information that's usually Marquette geared. So earlier in the season, when things were going well, I was looking at what does a typical one-seed resume look like and what would it take for us to get there. More recently, I did a check-in on all of our non-conference opponents and kind of did a roundup of where they stand. And even though college basketball typically goes from November to early April, I'm following it year-round, whether it's recruiting, scheduling, all that kind of stuff. It's just college basketball is my sport and Marquette is my team.
Well, Alan, I have so many questions I want to ask you because I haven't been a huge Marquette fan. I'm an Indiana alum, just like you went to school at Marquette. You have an affinity for your school, but if you love college basketball like you do and I do, we do the bracketology stuff. We've talked about bracketology in years past. We love watching the game of basketball, and for me, my knowledge of Marquette was 1977 in the championship with Al McGuire. Back in those days, it was Marquette and DePaul and Marquette and Notre Dame, the rivalries that were on local TV when I'm a little bit older than you are.
Yep.
When all of those types of games, and that's where, Marquette basketball, I think, really took off under Al McGuire. And then there were some few coaches after that, but the uniforms were fantastic with the untucked uniforms and the color scheme. Just really grabbed my attention. You had DePaul with some cool uniforms and Marquette, but that's way back before you were at Marquette. But Marquette basketball is special basketball, and in the city of Milwaukee and up there, it just has to be special and a winning tradition. But you mentioned Coach Crean and Dwayne Wade. Talk a little bit, share with us what made that team so special.
I think that it was a combination of, we really got the right coach at the right time. And Coach Crean, we always thought of him very much as a salesman. He's someone who does a
Yeah.
really good job of getting out to the students, getting them engaged. He'll be the guy who's in line handing out coffee or donuts or something along that line before a big game. When we used to do Marquette Madness, he would come out. The one year, the craziest one that I remember, he came out in a karate uniform, riding an ATV into the middle of the Al McGuire Center. It was bizarre. It was crazy. It was fun. And it just, the level of success obviously also was something that grabbed everybody. At the time we were in Conference USA, and today Conference USA isn't quite the league that it was back in the late 90s, early 2000s. At that time, Cincinnati with Bob Huggins was an absolute powerhouse, one of the best programs in the country. Louisville was fantastic. Memphis was really good. UNC Charlotte had a really solid team at that time. DePaul had a pulse. We were routinely getting 4 to 6 bids in the tournament.
Yep.
But they were a lot higher seeds than, you'll see that with like a Mountain West or something now. Conference USA was a lot more high major in terms of the seeds and the bids that we were getting. And the level of energy, especially as we kind of passed by Cincinnati and got up to that level, it had the entire campus buzzing. Everyone was excited about it. And a lot of it was also very homegrown. Wade was from Chicago, about 70 miles south of us. Travis Diener was a Wisconsin kid. Steve Novak was a Wisconsin kid. We had Robert Jackson, who was a center that started in the SEC, but transferred back, I believe, from Mississippi State, and was an absolute star on that Final Four team and the difference maker that we needed in the middle. So there was a lot of local connection in addition to the fan connection and bringing everybody back in who had been fans since the 70s.
Alan, did you have a favorite player on that team when you were in school in the program that you followed, and then also some of your favorite players since then that have played for Marquette?
Sure. I think on that team, it's almost impossible not to have Dwayne Wade be the first name that comes out of your mouth.
Right.
He's the greatest player in program history. Watching him, and it, depending on how old you are, if you're not old enough to have watched his career, he was truly one of the greatest shooting guards in the history of the game. Michael Jordan is a step above everybody. I don't put Wade quite on that tier, but I think if you stack him up side by side with Kobe, with any of the other greats, he's right there in terms of the impact that he had, what he could do on the court. And what I really loved about Wade was he wasn't just an offensive savant. He also was an amazing shot blocker at 6'3", and would get up and routinely be someone whose shot block rates were, it was like, how on earth is someone that size doing that? He would, he had the school record for steals until Jarrell McNeil came along, which, fast forward a couple of years after Wade, when we went into the Big East, the only holdover we had from those old teams was Steve Novak, but we had a recruiting class that included Jarrell McNeil, Wesley Matthews, and Dominique James, who was originally from Indiana. So a little bit closer to your neck of the woods. And that team was fantastic to watch because from their very first year, you could see that all three of them were Big East level players. And going into that league, there was, I don't want to necessarily say trepidation, but we weren't sure where we were going to fit in. Obviously with Wade, with the Final Four, we had been great, but no one was picking Marquette to be anywhere near the top of the Big East at that time. And right from the first year, we were competitive. We're able to earn a 5 seed in 2006, our first year in the Big East, and finished near the top of the league. We were 12-4. So very solid showing right out of the gates. And they continued that for the next few years. Coach Crean ended up leaving, obviously, going to Indiana, and that led to Buzz Williams taking the Amigos in their last season. And that, for me, was one of the toughest seasons because it was the year that we had every piece in place to make another big run. And with a few games left in the season, Dominique James, the starting point guard, injured his foot. He goes down, and they lost close game after close game. They had the lead in the second half against a absolutely top-notch Pitt team, against Louisville, lost in overtime to Syracuse. And all these tough games where, had they won them, had James been there, they probably would have pulled them out. They could have been a 1 seed, could have really set themselves up. But that transitioned into the Buzz years. And those teams were a lot of fun because they played so hard. And there were a number of off-the-court things with Buzz that weren't necessarily the best. We had some fights. We had some other misdeeds that ended up in the papers. I won't rehash that too much. But as far as on the court, Jay Crowder was a guy in the early 2010s that he won a Big East Player of the Year. And I have very rarely seen people play as hard as he did. As far as being the first to the floor, the guy who's going all out to challenge every shot, and at times would be playing the center and probably wasn't more than 6'4", maybe 6'5" on a good day. Just one of the toughest players you'll ever see. When Buzz left, we did have a few lean years under Steve Wojciechowski. Marcus Howard helped paper over that a little bit, and was one of the greatest shooters I've ever seen at any level. Just a phenomenal offensive piece, but the defense wasn't there, and that was ultimately, I think, what led to Shaka Smart. And these last 4 years under Shaka have, I feel like, in many ways been the most satisfying for me as a fan, largely because I think early on, I didn't know how good we had it when we went to the Final Four. Now, watching Shaka quickly build this team up to where, we earned a tourney bid the first year he was here. That wasn't really expected by many people. The second year, win Big East title, Big East tournament title. And those moments were phenomenal just because it felt like we were back. Last year spent most of the year in the top 10. This year have been ranked in the top 5. And while it may not be quite the heights that we were at earlier this year, on a night-to-night basis, you're going to get effort. You're going to get a hard-playing team. And you've got the talent that they can win against anybody they step on the court with.
Shaka Smart to me is one of my favorite coaches. We now get a lot of media credentials here with Delphi Bracketology. I'm very fortunate with the schools around us, Illinois, Notre Dame, Butler, IU, and Purdue. And so I always try to go when Marquette's down at Butler. And the media row is like 3 rows behind the bench, kind of catty-corner, but I can really watch Shaka operate. In your mind, you said this was a really refreshing, and the last 4 years have been really good for you as a fan. What has Shaka Smart specifically done for Marquette basketball that has made the difference from those down years in between, his run and Buzz Williams? What is it that you appreciate about Coach Smart?
So when Shaka came in, one of his first interviews, he was asked about how he was going to rebuild the program. And one of the things that he said was he had a notebook from his Texas days. And he said, if I ever start over somewhere, the first 2 years are going to be nothing but culture. It's going to be all culture, just instilling the ethos behind the program, the mindset behind the players, not worrying about the wins and the losses, anything like that, just getting the right players to do the right things. And I remember the first public practice that they had. I attended it. It was at Fiserv Forum, and watching Daryl Morcell, who had just transferred in from Maryland, who was a Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, watching him go up against this little scrawny kid from Memphis, Cam Jones, who looked like he weighed about 105 pounds, Stevie Mitchell, who looked like a deer in headlights, going up against someone as experienced as Morcell, you could see him just putting them through the paces. Watching Morcell go over screen, over screen, over screen to keep Cam from being able to get a shot off, and how tough he was, how diligent he was, how much he worked. And fast forwarding a few years and seeing all those traits that I saw in Morcell now in guys like Stevie, in guys like Chase Ross, in guys like Cam Jones. And a big part of it is that we have had continuity as a program. And I realize right now that's something very rare compared to other places. We haven't taken transfers. The first year, he did pick up Tyler Kolek, Omax Prosper out of the portal, Morcell came out of the portal. But that was a little bit of a different circumstance because he was coming in April or late March, early April, when high school players weren't really available. You weren't going to go out and land another Cam Jones type player at that point. So he used a little bit of the portal to establish the culture that he wanted, made sure that it was guys that would buy in, like Omax, like Tyler Kolek. Both Morcell and Kirkweth were grad transfers that set a very strong defensive tone. And our defense under Coach Wojciechowski was quite simply terrible. Year after year, we were a high major team with a sub 100 defensive rating in Ken Palm. And it was hard to watch. And as fun as it is to watch a Marcus Howard, an Andrew Rousey, a Sam Hauser stroke shot after shot after shot, every time they miss, they're probably giving it back on the other end. And we haven't had that issue. And the offense under Shaka has been good too. So we're seeing that effort on both ends. We're seeing the culture piece of it where the players connect to the fans. There's really a real love, a real connection. And because we've been able to watch these guys grow up, I've watched Cam Jones go from the guy that was getting beat up by Morcell to the guy that now in a practice the other guys can't keep up with. And I think that connection for the fans, it's meant a lot. It's really meant more when we see them rise up. I think it also makes it harder when we have a stretch like we're in right now, losing 4 of our last 6, because I see those difficult games for David Joplin, for Stevie Mitchell, guys who have been here. And it's like, these aren't people who just came in off the street, who we just brought in this year, where I don't have an attachment to them. I do have an attachment to these guys because they mean so much to the program.
I'm envious of that with you, Alan, and Marquette, and it's one of the reasons that I have a lot of Marquette gear now. I should have put on my sweatshirt and my practice shorts that I order. I think the connection to college players is one of the negatives of the portal. One of the positives is you can rebuild quick, but that continuity. You have a couple programs, Alan, in Marquette. Purdue is trying to do something very similar, and I'm sure there's other schools across the country, but they have my admiration for that same thing. You watch these players grow up, you're connected to them, you feel with them. You can carry them through a losing streak with them because you care about them as people as much as anything. And, Shaq is smart. I don't know the exact thing, but he has those energy plays that he tracks on the bench. What is it? Was it BGEs or something like that, right?
It's the EGBs, energy generating
EGBs.
Yep.
Yeah,
and it's
talk about the culture, right? I just love that.
And the things, there's a number of things that we end up tracking that are tracked in the stadium that you see live that you really don't get at a lot of other programs. They track deflections, which anytime someone gets a hand on the ball, whether it's a shot block, a steal, or just tipping it out of bounds, knocking it away, they track deflections. The energy generating behaviors, the EGBs, anything from that'll get the crowd hyped up, that'll get the players hyped up. An assist is, Shock always says, is the greatest energy generating behavior because you're giving your teammate the opponent or the opportunity to score. And I think that does, especially in a big game, in a close game, that gets the crowd into the game. I
Yeah.
was reading back a couple days ago, was 2 years since we beat Xavier. Top 15 ranked Xavier team came into the Fiserv Forum, and we beat them on a putback dunk by Olivier Maxence Prosper with like 1.5 seconds left. It was right at the end of the game. Omax slams it home. And I wrote afterwards in my journal that I just felt breathless at the time. And the amount of energy in the building, and I know a lot of buildings are going to get up, a lot of buildings are going to get hyped, but you really feel it when they're pulling the crowd in with that. Every time we get a kill, which is 3 defensive stops in a row, or a skunk, which is 6 defensive stops in a row, and one of the walk-ons, Jonah Lucas, will get this big skunk sign and hold it up and walk around showing it off to the crowd. And anytime I bring my kids, they get excited when we get a skunk because there's a skunk that shows up on the video board and starts passing gas all over the arena.
Jonah's from Lafayette here, just down the
really?
road from where I live. I think
Okay.
he played at Lafayette Harrison, if I'm correct on that. So
Okay.
a little local flavor. But I noticed that when I'm at the games at Butler, when they're about ready to get a kill, everyone on the bench puts their arms in a cross to signify that the bench is engaged, which is that culture piece. So you've mentioned a couple venues. Let's go to the atmosphere of Marquette. You talked about the skunk. You talked about the crowd getting crowd. Fiserv, is I'm saying that right? Right.
That's correct.
Is the arena now? But take us back through the arenas that you've been through with Marquette, and what it's like if someone would come to Milwaukee and be able to be fortunate enough to get a ticket to see Marquette play.
So I'll definitely say it's changed a lot from my first ever Marquette game when I was much younger and went to then the Mecca. Now I believe it's the Milwaukee Panther Arena. UWM, our other local college, plays there. But the Mecca was definitely, it's a smaller venue, seats about 9,000, and was a lot more intimate than some of the other venues we've had. From there, when the Bucks moved out of the Mecca, they were involved in the building of the Bradley Center. The drawback to the Bradley Center is that, and that was the building we played in from the early 90s until Fiserv was built. I want to say 2018, I think, was our first season in there. The drawback to the Bradley Center is it was built for hockey. The Pettit family built the building with the hope of bringing an NHL team in. And the Bucks and Marquette both played there because it was the largest venue that we had. So it could seat 18,000, which was great, but it was just not close enough for a good college environment, not really built. It was more of a squared off building as opposed to, feeling like everybody is equally close in there. Fiserv has been fantastic for us. It's an NBA arena. The Bucks also play there. You have every trapping you can imagine as far as, the video board. The pregame presentation is professional level. A ton of various concession stands, at least when they're all open. We do run into some times where some of the concession stands are closed. So that's a downside at times that's because it's not our building. But it's big. It's also very well designed specifically to watch basketball. There's not a bad seat in Fiserv. Even if you're all the way up, second floor, the way that they built the upper deck is it's a very steep walk down, but that steepness means that even if someone taller than you is sitting in front of you, they're far enough down that you can see over them. And you have a good view, a clear angle from anywhere in the building all the way up to the nosebleeds. Some of the really big games will end up getting standing room only crowds. And there's a third story that has a bar that overlooks the arena, and fans were able to sit up there and just look down and watch the game as well. So it's built for everyone in the building to have a great view. Um, it's been a fantastic venue for us, and especially since Shaka took over, I think that the combination of the energy the team brings, and this is really a fan base that was starved for getting back to the level of winning that we've been at. Um, going a 7-year stretch where we only end up in the tournament twice and not winning a single game was difficult. And the way that we immediately were competitive and immediately keeping up with the best teams in the league, it got everybody back in. We've set record crowd after record crowd. The UConn game earlier this month was a Marquette record that we broke from earlier in the year, that we broke from the end of the year last year. It just, every time we get a big game, I feel like we're getting a great crowd turnout. The fans are engaged, and what I love is it's also a knowledgeable fan base. They know when to stand, they know when to get into it, they know when to back off a little bit. But you'll see everybody just come up when you need that defensive stop, and when the opponents score 3-4 times in a row, and usually the times where it'll suck all the energy out, those will often be the times where everybody gets into it the most, because it's like, hey, the team needs us right now. Doesn't always end up resulting in a win, but Shaka's record at Fiserv is pretty good. I know at one point, I think he was 48-4. We've had a couple of losses this year, but it's been solid. You more likely than not are going to see a win when you go in there for the guys in blue and gold.
So one more history question, then I want to talk to you a little bit about this year's team.
Sure.
Obviously, your Final Four run when you're there as a student, but what was your best memory? You had to win 4 games in order to get to the Final Four, and the Final 4 didn't go as you wanted in that game. It kind of got out of control
Not
there,
at all.
which is always a little letdown. But getting to the Final Four is a huge accomplishment. Was there a game in that tournament run? Was it the Elite Eight game, or was it a game before that? And then follow that up, if you would, with a couple good memories since then that really stick out, whether you were in attendance or watching from afar.
Sure. So that tournament run, the 2 things that I will remember the most, the first would be the Pittsburgh game, which was our Sweet 16 game, and the Kentucky game. And it was a tough road even getting to that point. Holy Cross gave us fits in the first round. But the day before the Pittsburgh game, a friend of mine called me and said, hey, my dad has 2 tickets to the Elite Eight game, and he's not going to be able to go. If Marquette gets there, do you want one of them? And obviously my response, it's in Minneapolis. Like, I can make a 6-hour drive. I'm like, yes, absolutely. So I went on a first date with a girl and took her to a local sports bar to watch Marquette Pittsburgh. She wasn't a sports fan. I was going absolutely nuts. There was never a second date, but I have no regrets because I was bouncing all over that bar, just absolutely energized. And it was a really good, really competitive game. And then 2 days later, I drove up to Minneapolis. Dwayne Wade had the triple-double. It was one of those environments. And going in, it wasn't just that it was the Elite Eight or going to the Final Four. It was that it was Kentucky. It was a very clear number 1 throughout the entire year, Kentucky, that we were playing against. And they did have some injury issues at the time. So, I won't take that away from them. But we put it on them right from the start. And I think the final margin was 13, and it was not that close. At no point were they in that game. And because of the way the region had played out, Wisconsin was also in our region. So Wisconsin lost to Kentucky, but that put a ton of in-state fans in Minneapolis that weekend. So I think there were a number of the more casual fans that aren't as diehard for one or the other that brought each shirt up and said, hey, I'm going to cheer for whichever Wisconsin team is still left. And we turned the entire Metrodome into a Marquette home game. And I remember talking to some Kentucky fans afterwards, a few that were there, and I said to them, I'm like, I'm surprised you don't have more fans there. And they're like, yeah, everybody saved their money for the Final Four. And I'm like, okay. Since then, there are, my Lord, quite a few. The Steve Novak's buzzer beater to beat Notre Dame was a phenomenal game. Fantastic win. The Elite Eight run that we made in 2013, I think it felt so improbable. We were playing Davidson. I believe we were down 8 in the final minute and had hardly hit a 3 all game. Suddenly Vander Blue hits one, Jameel Wilson hits one. We were off to the races, and Davidson kept scoring. And we would get it a little bit back. They would stretch it back out, hit some free throws. We would get it a little bit back. They would hit their free throws. And Vander Blue ended up hitting the runner at the end of the game to put us ahead. It was the same play that had beat St. John's about 2 weeks before to win the Big East title. And he hit the runner. That was fantastic. Ended up creaming Miami in the Sweet 16 to get to the Elite Eight. That was a year where we heard a lot of talk about how Miami was going to run over us, how much better of a team they were. It was a very satisfying win. Marcus Howard gave us a number of memories. There was the game that he scored 40 in the second half against Buffalo. A number of 50-point performances. Unfortunately, none of them were at home, so I didn't get to see any of those live. But a little bit more recently, the 2023 team, when we won the Big East, that senior day, the last home game, we had St. John's, and I brought my daughter, and being able to watch them put up the ladders, cut down the nets, the confetti coming down, and to experience that with her was fantastic. And the past couple years, she's 6 now, and she's starting to get a better idea of what the scoreboard means, and can understand which team is in the lead, where we're at. And another, the most recent memory that really ties me to the program. So I have really good seats where we're at, and right next to where we are is where the players come out. When they come out, go out on the court, we're right there. So after a game recently, there's a family that sits next to us, and they've got a 9-year-old daughter. So their 9-year-old takes my 6-year-old. They run all the way up to the top of the stadium, all the way down the next row, and wait for the players. And after we win, they go all the way around, and it reminds me of the stories that I would hear about Zach Edey, how he would stay and sign everything for everybody. Right. And they were all going around, and as they come to the end, my daughter ended up getting pictures with Cam Jones, with Stevie Mitchell, with Ben Gold, and with Shaka Smart. And I took all of those, brought them home, printed them out, and the next time we went back and I gave her the pictures and a Sharpie. And now she has autographed pictures of her with Cam Jones, Stevie Mitchell, Shaka Smart, Ben Gold, and I just had a picture frame arrive the other day, and for her birthday next week, she's going to be getting all of those framed that she'll be able to have up on her wall. And the look on the players' faces when Ben Gold saw a picture of him with the kid holding it out to him, he just lit up. And it was a great connection that, it's a collectible that'll mean nothing to anybody else because no one else wants a picture of my kid. But for me and for her, it's something that means the world.
That is simply a great story, and that goes back to the culture piece that you talked that Shaka brings, and the connectivity when you have players for 2, 3, 4 years staying with the program. That's why I like doing these. I heard Terry Scanlon with VCU and talking about VCU and the pep band. Now I'm following their pep band on social media, right? So
yeah,
just really good stories in college basketball, and it's always good to hear that. That's a fantastic. Let's talk a little bit about this edition of Marquette basketball off to a really good start, as high as a 2 seed for a long time, and now it just seems like they're getting everyone's best shot. Every time I turn, I have them automatically recorded. That's how much I like Marquette. They automatically recorded on my Fubo streaming service. It just seems like they're down 15-4, early starts, teams just shooting the lights out, and then Marquette having to really fight back. It happened at Butler. They got down in the first half of Butler when I was there and had to come back. And it seems to me that they're just struggling a little bit to find their rhythm offensively at times, and they go in a little bit of drought, and then they have to fight their way back. Is that correct? And you lost Tyler Kolek, who is one of my favorite players to watch all time. Cam Jones has filled in remarkably in that situation. I think this is a team that's going to get underseeded or overseeded, however you say that. They're going to be a 6 or a 7, like you said earlier. You might have scrubbed them down to a 7, and boy, that's going to put some pressure on some higher seeds, because if they get back into the rhythm, they're really a 2 or a 3 seed talented team. Am I crazy or not?
I don't think you're crazy, but I think that we've seen two very different teams this year. The first 6 weeks of the season, and I mean, honestly, it was through the first half of the Dayton game. We were up big in UD Arena, looked like we were going to coast to that win. Came in there 9-1. Our only loss was to Iowa State on the road in a game that we were tied with about 5-6 minutes left to play. So, we were right there. They went on a run, put us away. But that Dayton game, the second half, they came out, stomped all over us. Came out of that with a loss. And if, anyone who's familiar with Parrish and Norlander, they always talk about sorting the data. If you go to T-Rank and you go back to December 8th, which was after the Wisconsin game, before that Dayton game, to today, Marquette is the 48th best team in the country, which very much equates to a bubble team. And even when, like you mentioned, that Butler game, a lot of the negatives that we're seeing now are things that were somewhat papered over by results. So we would have that, both games at Butler, we had some struggles with them. Had some difficulties with Georgetown, ended up with a win. Went down to DePaul, beat them, but it took overtime to get there. And a lot of the games that we were winning them, but it wasn't that convincing. And I think that it's a combination of things. One, the first 6 weeks of the season, Cam Jones was an absolute superstar. He was playing at National Player of the Year type level, and he's somewhat leveled off quite a bit, to the point where right now he's, maybe a second team All-American, certainly still a very good player on any given night, able to produce, able to put up a big stat line, but not doing it every night on a night in, night out basis like he was. I think that there may be some, I don't know if it's necessarily conditioning issues, but a number of nagging injuries. Stevie Mitchell, anytime he goes off the court, he doesn't go to the bench. He goes to the exercise bike and starts his legs going. And it's just making sure that he's going to be fresh, able to get back in there, that he doesn't tighten up. Ben Gold, I've seen, had a finger brace on a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if he, had a break. They didn't disclose anything. He still played through it. But I think there's been a number of nagging injuries. And I think a lot of the shooters, what we've had in the past, each of the first 3 years Shaka was here, we had positive shooting regression. So we would start off shooting terribly from three. Come January, February, the shooting would come around. And then by March, we looked dangerous. Well, this year, we started off poorly from three, and the shooting never came around. I don't know if that's because we don't have Tyler Kolek hitting guys in the spots where they want the ball, if it's just guys having poor shooting luck. But, once you get to the point that it's been about 2 months straight of poor shooting, it feels like maybe the team's just not as good a shooting team as we were hoping for. And I think that's really what sort of hamstrung them a little bit and brought them down to where we see them at now.
One of the things, Alan, I think from a coaching perspective is when Marquette's good, they're really moving people and moving the ball. And at times I've watched them lately, it seems like either the other team's defending them a lot better, or they get a little stagnant and the ball doesn't pop as much. And I know they do a lot of isolation drives, but they're also moving on the perimeter. And that goes to your comment about Kolek would always hit people at the right time in the pocket. They didn't have to worry about a closeout. So is that fixable? Do you think that they can rebound this year, make a run in the Big East tournament, and make some noise in the tournament, or is it just something that they're going to have to? This is who they are now, and they're going to have to catch a few breaks.
So, if I were betting right now, I wouldn't lay a ton of money on them simply because of what I've seen the past 2 months. But what happened in November and early December was real. What this team did to Purdue was real. What they did going into Maryland, a Maryland team that looks better and better by the week, that happened. I was there when we beat Wisconsin. And, there are a lot of good teams that Marquette didn't just go punch for punch with. They took them apart. Cam Jones has that ability. Stevie Mitchell has shown that ability. David Joplin can pop off for 20 points on any given night. Zayd Lowry the other night off the bench had a career high 25, something that we haven't seen from him. The talent is there. The ability is there. And what we're getting right now is an inconsistency on a night-to-night basis where one or two guys will go off, but you won't get Chase, Cam, Stevie all hitting at the same time. And if they can recapture that in March, who knows? This team might still have that run in them. They might be able to get to a second weekend, maybe even a Final Four if they end up with the right draw. I mean, it wasn't that long ago that we saw a UConn team run roughshod through their non-conference only to get laid low by the Big East, finish fourth, and as soon as they got out of Big East play, they went on a big run. Right. I'm not at all saying that I expect that from Marquette this year. That would certainly be the most pie in the sky of optimism. But I do think that what we saw early, it could be recaptured. We just need to see that focus. We need to see them locked in on defense, and the shooting has to come around at some point. If Cam and Jop start hitting again, and this can be a 35% three-point shooting team, I think the sky's the limit. If they're shooting, 29, 30%, we'll probably be going home early.
Let's hope so. I like doing these. I think I mentioned a fifth show. This might be our fourth one. We had VCU, now Marquette. We've had Alabama, Iowa. And I'm just growing the amount of programs that I have respect for. It used to be just Indiana and everyone else, but I love learning about all of this. A couple more questions, and I'll let you go. We've had you for a while. I could sit and probably talk hours with you about Marquette and about, we could do another hour on bracketology. I might have to have you back on here before the selection show to just talk that, and your expansion work is really good as well. I know some people don't want expansion. We dabbled a little bit in it with Delphi Bracketology. So for everyone listening, Alan has some great things. Check him out on cracksidewalks.com. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But superstitions. All fans, we're somewhat superstitious. Do you have anything when you attend or when you stay home that you can share that is unique to your Marquette basketball watching experience?
So I do have a few. I try very hard to divorce myself from them. For years, I would not wear a championship blue, which is our lighter blue, like our baby blue color. I would not wear a championship blue shirt on game day. I think I got a beautiful shirt that I absolutely loved. The first two times I wore it, we lost. And I refused after that to wear it. I'm like, I cannot wear this color. It's cursed. It's not going to work. Eventually I got to the point where I said, what I'm wearing on a couch in Milwaukee is not going to have any impact on what they're doing in an arena in New York City. And that one I put aside. However, I've noticed we play terribly in our black uniforms. Black is not one of Marquette's typical colors, but we went and lost to Nova last week wearing black. Had other games where we'll come out in a black uniform and it just does not seem to perform the way that it should. The one superstition that I'm definitely adopting, though, is bringing my daughter to big games, because when I don't, things tend to not go well. I didn't bring her to the Xavier game this year at home. We lost that. She didn't come to the UConn game on National Marquette Day. We lost that. And her coming into the world actually came with a Marquette win, because my wife's doctor was trying to set us up to induce. And my wife turned to me and said, well, when is the Marquette game? And it was senior night for Andrew Rousey, 2018. And I told her, she's like, okay, we'll come in that night. So we went in the morning, watched Marquette win, went in, had a very long labor that resulted in my daughter being born. And since then, she is undefeated in games she's gone to. At home, not so much, but when she goes to Fiserv, she has not seen a loss yet. And I'm pretty sure she's going to be joining me for St. John's, because I want to keep that streak up, and we need to get that win at the end of the year. So bringing her, that's the biggest superstition.
That's fantastic. Well, Alan, we've been talking now for over 45 minutes about Marquette basketball. I can't say thank you for coming on the show and sharing some of the things. I've learned a lot of things. I do appreciate your work, and I we do need to get you back on for bracketology stuff. I'm interested in your wins above bubble analysis. I'm using that a lot more now, the metrics as well as the quads and all of that stuff. But I think I'd like to save that for a different time. But
certainly.
So keep me on your radar, and good luck to Marquette and you and your daughter. Great story about the autographs and everything. That's the highlight of the show for me. So before we go, any last thoughts about college basketball, Marquette, anything that you'd like to share with our listeners?
One real quick one that ties us together. Coach Crean was in the building to broadcast a game recently, and it was the first time that he's been back since he left for Indiana where it was universal applause. And it was really good to see Coach Crean get that kind of recognition. I love what he did here. I think that what he did in Indiana was underrated, and it was good to see him get his due. I hope that at some point he's able to get the same reception from Hoosier fans. But thanks for the time. If you guys are looking for a last team in, keep an eye on Boise State. Their resume is a lot better than anyone realizes right now. And go Marquette.
Man, that bubble's crazy. It's driving me nuts. I got a team involved in it, so being very careful. But that's going to do it for this episode of our fan experience. We're Delphi Bracketology, and this is Bracket U. We'll be back, hopefully, if there's anyone who listens to this and would like to talk about their favorite team and get it out there for their fan base, please let me know. I have a lot of time to spend, even though it is our busy season. I will always talk basketball with you. Until then, look for our work at DelphiBracketology.com. We'll be putting out seed lists and brackets every Tuesday and Thursday. Interact with us on the X at Delphi Brackets. We have an Instagram we haven't really fully developed as well. We do have a donation page for pizza parties and shirts for our guys and gals. We have like 4 or 5 gals that have joined our club this year. Really good recruiting class. Very happy about what we're doing. And this fan experience I'd like to see expand. We have 4 or 5 videos now. I'd like to get 20 or 30, because there's nothing better than college basketball fans and their traditions and their memories. And Alan, we thank you for